Chapter 9, Section 3. George Washington is finally ready to retire. He decided not to run for a third term. He felt that 2 terms was enough, and he wanted to return to his Mount Vernon home, his estate in Virginia. This was a precedent that was followed by future presidents until Franklin Roosevelt, who was actually elected 4 times. He only served 12 years because he died after his 4th term. This is a picture of Mount Vernon where he wanted to retire to. Because FDR broke George Washington's precedent, they actually created the 22nd Amendment, and that turned his precedent into a constitutional amendment. That's why all presidents today only serve 2 terms. Here's a picture of Mount Vernon, which we're actually going to visit when we go to D.C. It's really cool. There's a lot of neat things to do at Mount Vernon. Here's a picture from the Potomac River looking at the back of the house, this patio area and this backyard. It's pretty cool to sit out there like George did many times, watching the great views of the Potomac. George Washington had some issues towards the end of his 2nd term. He didn't like people criticizing him. And one of his big criticisms was from John Jay, and he attacked Washington. Because he failed to support the French Revolution, Thomas Paine, who was also the author of Common Sense, called Washington treacherous in private friendship and hypocrite in public life. He was very angry that we didn't support the French after they helped us win the American Revolution. So when Washington leaves office, his farewell address, which actually this is not his farewell address, this picture does not represent that because he never verbally gave it. He didn't give it orally, he wrote it down. And here's a picture of his actual handwriting, writing his farewell address to the people. And they actually typed it up in the newspapers so everybody could read it. Now, in his farewell address, he talked about 3 things. The book talks about 2, but there was a 3rd thing that he warned everybody about. The first one, which the book mentioned, was political parties. He witnessed the creation of the first political parties, Democrat, Republicans, and the Federalists, and he felt that a lot of his political attacks on him was the outcome of political disagreements, which still happens today. He warned that such differences could weaken the nation. Here's a picture of current political parties. The Democrats and the elephant is the Republicans. The Democrats were created from Andrew Jackson, and they have the cartoon figure of a donkey because Jackson was stubborn like a mule. No interesting story for the elephant because the elephant, just a political cartoonist, drew an elephant to represent Republicans that's kind of stuck. And they're supposed to work together, but they usually never do. Here's a picture of the actual newspaper article for Washington's farewell address. You can see, if you read it, the way they spell things back then. Administered. F looks like it replaces the S in a lot of words. Let's see. I see it there. And especially, as it may conduce. So it's kind of the old English, a little different. The second thing they said is worry about foreign treaties. He warned that agreements with foreign nations might work against U.S. interests. He urged the nation leaders to remain neutral and steer clear of permanent alliances with any portion of the foreign world. He was almost dragged into a war with France and England because of a treaty he had with France. And remember, he was able to get away from that because of the king they agreed with got his head cut off. And the third thing that's not in the book is he warned them about debt. Stay away from the national debt, which they had a lot of debt after the war. All right, the first election post-Washington was in 1796. If you notice, this one's a little different. George Washington won the first one by landslide. This one was barely won by Adams. He had 51% electoral vote, which was all that was needed, to Jefferson's 49%. It was the first election in which political parties competed. The Federalists win, and Democrat Republicans come in second. Back then, the Constitution stated that the runner-up should become vice president. That has been changed because they figured out that really doesn't work when you have two people that disagree with each other. One's a president, one's a vice president, and so now they run together as one ticket. Adams became the first president to govern from the new nation's capital city. He's actually going to move into Washington, D.C. right at the end of his administration. Jefferson will be the first president to stay his entire presidency there. When he moved in, the new White House was cold, damp, and unfinished. It was basically built on a swamp, and it was still being built when he moved in. Describe how problems with France created challenges for President Adams, and how did he deal with them? Well, first of all, relations with France and the United States were tense. Remember, we didn't support them. They're mad at us. Britain and France are still at war. France began seizing and harassing U.S. ships. So they were trying to egg us on and teach us a lesson. They would attack our shipping. They would take our sailors. They looted more than 300 ships. Some Federalists called for war with France, but Adams hoped talks would restore calm. He wanted to peacefully negotiate out of the war. He, just like George Washington, didn't feel like we should go to war. So he sent 3 individuals, Charles Pinckney, Eldridge Gerry, and John Marshall, to Paris to negotiate a treaty. When they show up, they have some problems, and this is called the XYZ affair. And it caused a lot of problems for President Adams. And here's what the XYZ affair is. The envoys requested a meeting with the foreign, so the envoys, the 3 guys, basically requested a meeting with the French Minister of Foreign Affairs. They were ignored. Then, when 3 French agents, referred to as XYZ, like in math class, we don't know who they were, made an offer to the 3 Americans that they could meet the minister only if they did the following. They gave him a $10 million loan, and they offered a $250,000 bribe to talk to the minister. Well, obviously, they were outraged. They refused, and they went home. And Adams wanted to know all about it. And when the reporters and everybody found out, they tagged it as the XYZ affair because they didn't know who the 3 people were, and everybody was outraged. Okay, and Americans were angry. Most called for war. Everybody wanted to go to war. How dare France do that? And one of the battle cries was "Millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute." Became a popular slogan of the day, which we'll talk about later. Congress's reaction: Federalists controlled Congress, and they canceled all treaties with France, putting us in position to go to war. U.S. ships to seize French vessels. They order our ships to attack, and now we have a problem. And so, going back to millions for defense, not 1 cent for tribute, what does that mean? That means America would rather spend millions of dollars on soldiers, ships, weapons, and supplies to prepare for war than pay 1 cent to France as a bribe for peace. They weren't going to be strong-armed. They'd rather pay 10 times what they're supposed to keep the honor and not give somebody a bribe. And everybody wanted to go to war except for Adams. And it says what angered Adams during the XYZ affair and how he handled it. Well, he was angered by the criticism in the time of crisis. Everybody criticized Adams for how he wasn't going to war. Adams and the Federalists were popular with the public, but not Adams. Okay. The Democrat-Republicans were very critical of Adams because they were sympathetic to France. Remember, they were pro-French. One newspaper called Adams the blasted tyrant of America. Adams didn't like this, and so he blamed the Democrat-Republican newspapers and new immigrants. He knew immigrants coming to this country, a lot were coming from France, and a lot of them were joining the Democrat-Republican Party. So he blamed new immigrants for flooding the party, and he also blamed the newspaper reporters. So the question is, how does Adams handle this? What they do is he passes a law to silence their critics called the Alien and Sedition Act. And to silence his critics, the Alien and Sedition Acts were 2 parts. Alien dealt with the immigrants. Sedition dealt with people saying bad things about the president. And so it targeted aliens, that's on the test, who were immigrants who were not yet citizen. It made it basically harder for them to become a citizen. It increased the waiting period for U.S. citizenship from 5 to 14 years. It gave the president the power to arrest suspicious aliens or deport them in wartime. So basically, Adams could kick out all the Democrat-Republican supporters before they became citizens. It also outlawed sedition. or stirring up rebellion against the government. Basically, that was a violation of the First Amendment. They eventually did throw newspaper editors in jail for this, and Jefferson and Madison are outraged about the Federalists clamping down on freedom of speech and press and trying to silence their opposition. So, how'd they fight it? Well, the Federalists came up with the Alien Sedition Act, and so Democrat Republicans, the other political party, came up with their own little plan. Jefferson and Madison fought back with the ideas that states had certain rights that the federal government cannot overrule, state rights. Madison's resolutions was approved by Virginia and Kentucky. And so basically they're called the Kentucky-Virginia resolutions, and basically what they say is states could overturn federal law. So the Kentucky-Virginia resolution insisted on the principle of nullification. Now this is really bad for a federalism, because basically states can override a federal government. This is what's going to come up for the American Civil War. This state nullification is why the southern states left the Union. The idea that the state could nullify or cancel an act of Congress that is considered unconstitutional. Jefferson and Madison were not successful in overturning the acts while Adams was president, but as soon as Jefferson is going to win the presidency in 1800, they're going to get rid of the Alien Sedition Acts. So who won the battle between Jefferson and Adams? Well, Adams reopened talks with France, and the United States made peace with France. Now this took place at the convention of 1800, and actually this agreement to stop fighting was the one thing that destroyed Adams' political career. Adams' actions made him enemies among the Federalists. It cost him the election of 1800. So he's going to lose his re-election because he wanted to stay out of war. Jefferson is going to win the election of 1800, so I guess in theory you can say Jefferson beat Adams because he beat him in the election of 1800. Now Adams is going to leave office as a one-term president, and despite that, he was proud of keeping us out of bloodshed. And on his tombstone, he requested that it said, "Here lies John Adams, who took it upon himself the responsibility of peace with France in the year 1800." And again, John Adams was not very popular. He lost support from his party because he kept us out of war. And so I think he did the right thing, but it ruined his political career, and he lost the election in 1800. All right.